Welcome to this video. I'm just going to try out a prezi presentation here on education. The following prezi is loosely based on some sections from Gary Thomas's book Education, a very short introduction, so check that out if you can. Start off with a quotation from Aristotle, The Politics. For in modern times, says Aristotle, there are opposing views about the tasks to be set, for there are no generally accepted assumptions about what the young should learn, either for virtues or for the best life. Nor yet is it clear whether their education ought to be conducted with more concern for the intellect than for the character of the soul. As you can see then, the debates around what's more important to educate, the mind or the soul, whatever that might mean in that time, character education or intellectual education, that debate is at least as old as Aristotle himself. So we're talking 330 BC in ancient Greece. So it's important to recognise that the debates around different forms and different focuses for education is an ancient one. So that's the big context. I just want to now introduce a very common binary. Scholars sometimes call it a binary or a dualism or an opposition. Basically, there are two sides to this story, and you can often see education placed on one side or the other, or particular practices within education as either formal or progressive. So I'm now going to just outline a little bit about formal education versus progressive education. Progressive education can sometimes also be called informal education, and indeed formal education itself can sometimes be called traditional education. So let's move on. So if we move over to formal education, as I say, sometimes called traditional education, you might have this image of the classic schoolroom, people in rows, boys separated from girls. This is a sort of, perhaps a Victorian or a early 20th century image of educational practice, rather disciplinarian in style. You might say subject-centered rather than student-centered, and about learning facts rather than, as it were, experience itself. So this kind of traditional, there's an image you have then of traditional education, and this goes back to, or some of the ideas go back certainly to Plato, as you can see, writing in 470 to 399 BC. Plato's view of education is that the individual must be fitted in and subordinated to society. Really important to remember, though, that for Plato, this isn't just any society, it is the just society of what he calls the Republic. And the Republic is a just society which is, basically a good and fair one. Now, if you can imagine a good and fair society, then you might be more sympathetic to the idea that individuals need to be subordinated to or fitted into that just society. If, of course, a society is not so just, we might raise legitimate questions about whether education should be fitting people into that society. So it rather depends upon the nature of society. As I said, Plato in the Republic is looking at really the ideal kind of society. Interestingly, Plato argues that children should be removed from their parents from a young age. Children really should become wards of the state, that is, looked after by the state. That means the kinds of attachments and emotional, sentimental aspects of parenting won't inhibit and get in the way of what's good and what's best for children. So for Plato, the emotional life and the attachments that are around that can actually inhibit good parenting or at least good education and good upbringing. So if I'm a father, I'm not going to know who my children are. That's the radical view, but that doesn't mean that I might not be involved in child rearing. I might be, I just might not know which children are mine and which are not mine.